Hey everybody, it's the NFT Roundtable podcast by BWiT. It is Tuesday, October 11th, 2022, and I'm your host, Iris Nevins. Today, I'm speaking with a very special guest, Lexi Butler, who is the founder of Sista Circle, Black Women in Tech. And Lexi is also the chief of staff at Twitter. I'm very excited to have Lexi today. We go way back. We'll walk through that story on the call. But Sista Circle is a solidarity group dedicated to supporting the work of Black women in the technology industry. It was established in April 2017, and I was one of the early members. And years later, this group has continued to grow and thrive and impact women all over the world. And I'm really excited to get into the story behind Sista Circle. So welcome, Lexi. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Me too. Me too. We are definitely coming full circle.
Yes.
So just to start, why don't you do a brief intro? Who's Lexi? Where are you from? Where did you grow up? And talk a bit about what you do at Twitter.
Yes, I love that question. My name is Lexi B. I am a proud Black American woman with roots really ingrained in the American antebellum South with the enslavement of West Africans. And it's very important for me to say that because I want to make it clear that Black is not a monolith, and every Black person that you meet does not have the same background or understanding, because where they come from of different points, especially in a colonial definition of what Blackness means. And so I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, with, Midwestern family, Midwestern roots all the way, that definitely sometimes tend to come up and down. I currently live in Oakland, California with my husband and my dog. And how I got here, very high level, was that growing up, I just knew that I wanted to get out of St. Louis and I wanted to get out of Missouri. I really didn't know what that looked like, but my parents said, if you want to get out, you need to go to college outside of the state. So growing up, my understanding of what the world was very much like, do good in school so you can leave the state of Missouri. And I always wanted to go to Stanford, I think because, as a very young person, California seemed really, really, really far away. So I applied and I got in, and that really, really jump-started this journey into the technology industry. As an 18-year-old, a freshman going to Stanford University from St. Louis, Missouri, I didn't know what tech was. I used to walk around campus and people say things like, I'm interning at a startup. And I would just be like, that's so great. I had no clue what a startup was. I would just go with the flow. I can fake it till you make it. I distinctly remember at Stanford, it's a very large campus. So most of the students, we have bicycles. And I remember biking down University Avenue, which is a major street that's actually part of Palo Alto, the city that is next to Stanford. But University Avenue goes from downtown Palo Alto all the way into Stanford campus. So we used to bike down the University Avenue to get coffee or get pizza or, do things that are off campus. And I remember biking one day in my first year and seeing the Facebook sign, because the Facebook headquarters was literally on University Avenue, and calling my mom and saying, Facebook has an office. And I remember it was the first time that it all came together for me, because remember the age that I am, I also remember that I was a junior or senior in high school when Facebook started allowing non-college students to join Facebook. So I would say Facebook was my first understanding of social media and the internet. I knew Black Planet existed. My parents didn't allow me to have a Black Planet. So Facebook was my real introduction to play with what the internet can do beyond looking up books for a class, for a history class, right? And so to see Facebook on University Avenue as I bike and to watch people go in and out, that was my first understanding that, oh, there is an industry that backs this up, and humans work there and make money, and maybe I could too, ? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I relate in many ways to that process of realizing oh shit, tech it's been in front of my face this whole time and I didn't even realize it. I actually didn't process things until a lot later, probably around 2024, 23, 24. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, I think my first introduction to a startup was a college classmate that was working at a startup and like reached out asking if I would want to come and work there. And I remember being like, I just remember thinking it was really cool, but it still didn't fully sink in my brain, like what a startup was, until I actually started getting exposed to like coding and, the like software, like thinking about like what's actually behind the software that I use every single day, like who makes it. So yeah, I completely relate. I'm wondering, when it comes to being on a campus like Stanford, for example, where so many people are probably coming onto campus already having that kind of knowledge or that experience, right? Like, what was your process for getting up to speed? Like, once it started to sink in, how did you then go about being like, okay, I want to understand what this all is?
Yeah, I didn't. I ran away from it. So first and foremost, to give background on Stanford, I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about Stanford University as a school, especially as it relates to Blackness. So when I was in school, my class, so I'm 18, this is what, September, October 2007. I'm dating myself. I think there were 1900, let's just say 2000 other 18-year-olds in my class, the class of 2011. And at the time that I went to Stanford, the campus was 15% Black undergrad, which is...
That's actually pretty good.
That's my point.
BWiT.
Right. That's my point. So a lot of people, when I say that, they're like, what? Because I think that people assume that me going to Stanford, it was me and like 2.5 other Black people, in a huddle. And I always tell people, obviously, it's not as Black from a population standpoint as an HBCU. No PWI is going to be as Black as an HBCU. But I really had a strong Black community as an 18 to 22-year-old at Stanford. And so for me, it was... Number one, we're at Stanford. Regardless of color, we have to get these general ed requirements done. Stanford did at the time. I don't know if they still do. They probably do. Had a general ed requirement for computer science. I'll never forget. It was CS 106. And it was basic HTML. So if you're not a computer science student, or I think it was science, technology, and society, which basically mixed computer science and philosophy and business together. If you weren't in this techie space, you had to get through CX 105 or 106 in order to get your diploma. And everybody knew that. And I think that is very Stanford specific because, as we all know, a lot of these tech industries were built off of the Stanford computer science minds, which is how one of the reasons I think Silicon Valley is literally located where it is. Because you have schools like Stanford and Berkeley and San Jose State and all these schools that really kind of help build that power force of like computers can do magical things, right? And I was the student where I didn't want to go into tech. I was scared of it. Remember, I didn't know what a startup was. I felt like everybody else knew what a startup was and I didn't. So I didn't want to tell people that I didn't know what a startup was, right? Do what the cool kids do. So what I did was that I said, you know what? I'm going to lean into the side that's very creative for me. And I would tell people I want to go into fashion PR, which I didn't say that wasn't a lie. I've always enjoyed fashion. I've always enjoyed creativity. I've always enjoyed how clothes can tell stories. So, because I used to do a lot of musical theater. So, and my favorite part of being on stage was the costume. I loved my costume, even the ugly costumes. I was like, this is so cool that you can literally transform my body through fabric. So I went to Stanford and everybody was like, I'm going to work at this startup and I'm going to work at Microsoft. And I was the kid who was just like, I'm going to get through CS 105, 106 because that's how I get my degree, but I'm going into fashion PR. I want to do PR marketing in some consumer-based companies. I want to make the Super Bowl commercial. I want to produce a fashion show. I want to work. I remember at one point I told a professor, I said, my dream job is to be the woman at OPI who gets to name the nail colors. Because I was like, she's clearly brilliant because those nail color names are fabulous, right? And at one time I was really going down this path of what does it look like to be in the nail industry, because I love getting my nails done. And I did internships in all of these things. And what had happened was I came back senior year. And of course, you always ask seniors whether they're in high school or college, the worst question ever, which you should never ask them, which is, so what's next, right? And I had just finished an internship with Ralph Lauren Couture in New York, and I hated it. I loved the clothes. I didn't like the treatment. This is 2010. So this is back in the day when interns were not paid. These are 14, 15-hour days. I felt very isolated. I was the only Black human body in the Ralph Lauren PR department at the time. I was the only person who wasn't a size -0 who worked in the department. Not just like, forget the models, like the people who work in the department.
I love the -0 comment.
That's what it was, right? I was the only person who had never been dated in fashion. All the other interns, it was like, my mom does XYZ for Tory Burch. I had one girl whose mom was the head buyer for Macy's. All of the people that were there had lived in New York before. Many of them were from New York, living in penthouse mansions in Tribeca. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I went to New York once to sing at Carnegie Hall with my 6th grade choir, right? So it's just like, there's just a lot of layers here where I'm like, little Lexi B was like, this is a lot. Like, forget the work. There were so many just moments of like, this is a lot for me. And a lot of it, I couldn't fake it till I make it. And so I felt very unsupported, very unvalidated, and just very alone and isolated that summer. So I come back to Stanford and all my professors are like, so we're going to do fashion PR, right? And I was like, absolutely not. And they said, okay, well, what are we going to do? Because you graduate in like 6 months. I said, that's a great question. So I started thinking about that. And it just so happened that this Black woman who's phenomenal and now a very phenomenal powerhouse in the tech industry, computer science major. I saw her in the quad one day, and this had to be like right before spring break. So y'all, we got like, and Stanford's on quarters. So spring break, and then we have 10 more weeks and then we graduate. And I saw her right before spring break, and she said, Lexi, where are you going to work when you graduate? And she said, you're younger than me. And I just started crying. Because I was like, why would you ask me something so oppressive? I don't know. And my parents are going to come and see me graduate, and I'm going to be a failure because I have no idea what's going on right now. And I need to make something up in the next 5 days during spring break, right? And she said, well, I interned at this company called NetApp. I was a software engineer, and they are looking for a new college grad to come and be a program manager. And I said, well, I'm not a coder. And she said, oh, you don't need to be a coder. You just have to talk a lot. And I said, I can do that. And that's how I got my job at NetApp. And so she gave me the contact to her boss. During spring break, I went for my in-person interview, and I got selected to be a new college grad engineering program manager at NetApp. I faked it till I made it through the interview. I still don't know if the people who interviewed me really saw through my BS, but I was like, oh, we gonna make this work, right? I have no clue what a program manager does, but we gonna make this work. And I got the job, and then I started I started on July 5th of 2011. So about 3 weeks after I graduated. That's how I got into tech. Yeah.
Wow. That's an amazing story and quite hilarious as well. I could definitely see you doing theater or, something performance based. Is that something that you still are interested in or like pursue outside of work?
No, I love musical theater. And to be very frank with you, growing up in St. Louis, my dream was to be Bernadette Peters. Bernadette Peters, for people who don't know, is a very, very famous Broadway actress. Most people know her as the stepmother in Brandy's Cinderella. But because I was in musical theater so much, I knew her as Bernadette Peters. And when I saw Brandy's Cinderella, I was like, oh my God, it's Bernadette Peters. And she's fabulous. She's fabulous. And she is a woman who happens to be white, not a white woman, and they're different. And then I remember growing up, I heard of Audra McDonald, who's this very, very famous Black woman who's a superstar on the stage. And so I started following her, and this is pre-internet. So I wanted to be Bernadette Peters and Audrey McDonald's love child on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And that clearly didn't end up happening. And so I think that I love the stage. I am the person that, give me Broadway tickets anytime, and I will fly in to go see the show. I have friends who are now in those shows, so it's pretty cool to go support them. I do think that a lot of the work that I do and how I portray myself, a lot of those lessons do come from the stage. So this idea of you make it, this idea of you gonna slap this costume on and make it work. This idea of how to influence people. A lot of the speaking that I do a lot of speaking. So I'm still on the stage. I'm just not singing or tap dancing, but it definitely has influenced my life a lot. And the older that I get, the more I see it day to day, of like the lessons that I learned in these intense dance classes and singing lessons and, rehearsing 18-hour days over the summer. They're the same things that I have to utilize to like sustain stamina as an adult in my working life. Yeah.
Yeah. I just looked up Audrey McDonald. First of all, she's gorgeous.
Yeah, she's phenomenal.
Yeah, and she looks like she just has so much personality and character. But yeah, I think that I think one of the biggest things that I've learned from tech is the importance of understanding transferable skill sets.
Yeah.
Right. And it seems like that's exactly what you've been able to do, is you've been able to take all of these like passions and skill sets that you were accumulating throughout your life in doing things completely unrelated to computer science or tech, and you were able to transfer them over to this industry where you've had this really actual phenomenal career in tech. So let's talk about, let's just kind of run through the different jobs that you've had and, how your career has evolved over the last, since you graduated.
So I was at NetApp for 4.5 years. And it was weird because, and I'm going to be very specific because I think that title and what you do many times are not the same. And that is very similar in my career. So at NetApp, I started as a 22-year-old engineering program manager. And I was a program manager in the engineering department for about 2 years. What happened was that there was a reorg. Every year at NetApp, there's a reorg. And the new college grads, we usually got hit the hardest because number one, we're cheap labor. So of course you're going to keep us. But then number two, we don't even know where our nose is yet, right? We're still trying to navigate adulting. So we don't really have a lot of say in where we want to go during this reorg. So they just kind of place us. They just kind of sprinkle us over. So for the first 2 years, I stayed in engineering. And I remember the first year I was a TPM. I was learning how to be a TPM. My manager is a very well-established TPM, and I was basically shadowing her for a year and doing all the things that she didn't like to do for TPMing for a product line. My second year in engineering, I moved over to a different manager, and I started working on this idea of like how almost like change management and how do you not work with engineers on a day-to-day perspective, but when things happen and you have to make changes in the organization, how do you get them to do that change a lot smoothly and more faster, right? I'm sorry, more faster and faster. Wow. My third year, I actually went into procurement. So NetApp is a hardware company by blood that uses software. And so we had a procurement company. We had SKUs. We literally had physical pieces of, I used to call them Lego pieces in different depots around the world. And I got to work in the procurement area, working with like our factories and our depots. And I remember one year I actually was the lead program manager on moving one of our procurement plants from one state to another, right? And then I also got to dabble in marketing. So when I was ready to leave NetApp and figure out what I wanted to do next, I was very scared because when you read my resume, it just looked like I just hopscotched to random places because I did not have a through line. And in NetApp, I didn't have a through line. My through line was, I want to keep my job, I want to pay my rent, and whatever y'all want me to do, I'll sit here and figure it out. But I never really thought about a career strategy. Like at NetApp, my strategy was keep your job. 101. Yeah. That's it. And I had a lot of imposter syndrome because of the stage. I think a lot of people didn't realize that. But I would drive to work every morning almost damn near in tears because in my head, I said, I don't have a computer engineering degree. Everybody in this room is a computer scientist, an engineer, or just has 25 plus years on their resume. And so I felt like the odd duck. So what I did was I slapped a good color lipstick, always had some bomb shoes, and very similar to the stage, I would just pretend that I owned this place, even though I had no clue. No clue.
Yeah.
And I think that attitude actually got me very far because a lot of people thought I really knew what I was talking about. And then you had a few people that knew that I did not know that I was talking about. And they were usually like senior leader white men, but they loved it. They loved it. And some of them,
because they've probably done the same thing.
I will never forget. I had this senior white man. I won't tell his name, but he came up to me once in the hall and he pulled me aside and he was like, "I know your secret." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "I know that you don't know." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he laughed and he said, "Oh no, this whole conversation is a compliment." And he was like, "Keep that up." And I was like, "Okay." Right? So because of this attitude, the good news about that attitude was I think that a lot of people had never seen a human like me before. They had not seen this 5'2" girl wearing 4-inch heels every day, walking into rooms like she knew what she was talking about and had no clue. They had not been around a Black person before. They had not been around a Black person in engineering before. There were a lot of new things, regardless of racist behavior or not. Just me as this one little conglomerate, they were like, we don't know what to do with this. And so because of that, I got to be in a lot of rooms with leadership. And that affected my career. I got to do things like, I remember once I was like in a weekly meeting with like the senior leaders of engineering. And even my own boss was like, how did you get an invite to that? And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, well, go. And I said, of course. So I would just be in meetings and people be like, what are you here to do? And I'm like, learn, observe.
Yeah.
But what happened in those meetings was that I watched how people talk and I started mimicking behavior. I was like, oh, so instead of saying F you, you say this. Oh, when you want something done, but you don't personally want to take ownership of that deliverable, you say this. I started learning the chess game of a capitalist corporate environment. And that's what NetApp gave me. And I think that's very, very important. So that was the foundation tech for me. It wasn't the work. It was like, oh no, it doesn't matter what the work is. This is how you use language to get what you want. This is how you utilize phrases and terms to show that you are the most powerful person in the room, or you're actually the subject matter expert of this topic in the room, or actually you're here because your boss is a subject matter expert. And so he or she or them want to know ABC. So you're here to get that done. That's what NetApp taught me, because I would just be in rooms with these leaders and they would play that game all day long. And I would just sit there and take notes. And then I would leave the room and then I go to my meetings and I would try it out like musical theater. And sometimes it would land and I'd be like, we're going to keep that. And sometimes it wouldn't land. And then I'd be at home and be like, well, why didn't it land? Was it my tone? Is it because he's a white rich man so he can say it like that, but I can't? So how can I rework it tomorrow where the intent and the impact is still the same as this other person, but coming from me at work? So I spent 4 years just in and out of meetings, really playing like a stage. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, well, first of all, I love the way that you told this story. I was so happy I'm getting these details that I've never gotten before. I mean, there's just so much to learn from your story, and we have so much more to get into, but I really love the point about being able to observe, take notes, and replicate or mimic. What is it that babies do? They imitate.
They imitate. And that's what I did.
Yeah. And I think that, the ability to imitate what you see other people around you doing and to be able to imitate effectively is such an important skill set and a huge sign of intelligence actually as well, you know, and and if you can do it and you can do it fast, it's like it just opens up so many doors. Like people want to know that you're a fast learner, even if you don't come in with the information, that you can just watch them and just learn and figure it out. And it seems like that's what you've been able to do. So after NetApp,
I went to Airbnb. And so I'll never forget, this was January 2016. I had decided that it was time for me to leave NetApp. And I was having a lot of anxiety over interviewing for jobs because now I've been 4 years in, you know, I'm definitely not entry. I'm probably mid. I'm definitely not senior. But who's going to hire me with this resume? I did not know how to brand myself. And I remember I just sent my resume out to hundreds and hundreds of people. I was actually looking over every time that I look for a new job. I make a Google sheet so I know where I applied to. And I was looking over it a few weeks ago and I applied to 321 places.
Wow.
Of those places, I think I got maybe 10 callbacks.
Wow.
Yeah. And I got 2 offers. And well, I'll say an offer and a half because one company, I told them no before they gave me the offer. But you know what? We'll say 2. I'm just going to own that. I got that job. You don't need to know about that. And what happened with Airbnb was that I saw a job. Airbnb in 2016 was the hottest startup to be involved in. It was the hottest startup on the block. And they had one program project manager job in compliance. And so I applied not knowing what compliance was. I was like, we're going to make this work. We're going to make it work. We're going to make it work. And I got the interview. I went to the interview and I got the job. And I remember I was so confused why I got this job. Later on in my Airbnb journey, I remember the recruiter told me, she said, you know, there were a lot of people who applied for this job. Do you know the reason why you got the job? And I was like, yeah. And she said, because your manager was actually looking for someone like you who had worked in different departments. And so I say that story to let people know that the thing that oftentimes we think is going to hold us back actually propels me forward. I applied to 321 jobs, and I'm sure that the majority of those jobs, the reason why I didn't get was even if the recruiter looked at the resume, they were like, what narrative is this? Right? Like we have engineering, we have change management, we have marketing, we have procurement. Like, why is she bouncing around in different departments every single year? Why can't she sit still? Because, you know, on your resume, you don't say things like, oh, there was a layoff and they just like moved me down the hall and I didn't have a say in it, right? And at Airbnb, this job, the manager and the team, for whatever reason, they were looking for that person. So it just worked out. And Airbnb was a very transformative time because 2.5 weeks after I joined, the hashtag Airbnb while Black went viral. So I start this company at the hottest tech company. And at this point, and I could be wrong about its history, but this is like the first time or the biggest time that Airbnb has been in the news for something very, very bad, which is people saying that they are being discriminated against, oppressed, and unsafe because hosts on the site, something happens in that journey, whether it's happening while you're trying to book, whether it's happening when you get to the house, something's happening in these different phases that are making people feel very unsafe, very violated, and very oppressed. And I think it was the first time that Airbnb was like, what is going on? We have to control this narrative. So I was, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And my manager at the time, she was one of the most seasoned program managers at the company. And I use the term program manager. A programmer or project manager is someone who can get things done, period. We can add these sexy terms to it, but that's all that it is, who can mobilize groups of people and get things done. And I'll never forget, I was sitting near her in our little pod area, and the CEO came by and said, someone needs to fix this. And she just allowed me to tag along. And so very early on in my Airbnb journey, I was spending almost every day in meetings with the C-suite, having strategy conversations, watching very seasoned, intelligent tech leaders who left their jobs to come to Airbnb and try this experiment, sit in a room. And I was in the room when it wasn't like, oh, here's the strategy, go execute, which I was used to. It was like, okay, so can somebody print out the tweets? Like I was in that room where I was reading the tweets out loud to to these leaders of this company, and they were like, wait, what? So to be in that room from, you know, step -3, I think was very transformative for me to see how you shape a movement and how you literally change a company, how you create policy that a company never had, because the company never thought that people would be mean to each other when they say, Irish, you can come stay in my room, you know? What happens with sex trafficking in Airbnbs, murder, like anything bad that could happen, I got to be literally, you know, in the room where it happens, of helping build this strategy, whiteboarding this out of, so what are we going to do? And what is each department going to do with this company? And what is the response to this? What is the consequence matrix? I remember being in the room and whiteboarding the consequence matrix of like, so if Iris books an Airbnb and her host says, you're ugly, the host gets this consequence. If the host threatens Iris's life, the host gets this consequence. If the host, like whiteboarding this out with the head of the head of trust and safety, and then taking pictures, and then starting to actually work that into work streams and programming and training trust and safety people on how to actually use it. Yeah, it was crazy.
Wow, that's incredible. So essentially building out a lot of their compliance structures from scratch.
Real scratch. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Post-its and whiteout scratch. Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy, but it was so fun. I loved every minute of it. I did.
What was the craziest thing that ever happened in an Airbnb while you were there that you can mention? And you don't have to give like, you know, names or super specifics or anything, but
the one,
something juicy. You know, I'm just going to say, I've been dying to ask you this question because when I met you, I think you were at Airbnb and you told me about your job. And I remember you being like, I can't tell you any more than that.
I probably still can't talk about this stuff, but I think the one that we can, that was wild to me was that, we had a host. I think it was New York. I keep making that up. I forgot the city, but we had a family. I don't know if it was a family or a young couple. They walked in the house. It was one of the Airbnbs, and it was like a guest room. And they walk in the house, and this family, I guess, their grandparent or elder, an ancestor, was actually a Nazi. So they had a lot of this man's stuff around the house. The family thought it was just like, we love grandpa. Despite the bad things grandpa did, we love grandpa. Well, for folks who don't remember, when you become a Nazi, you're always a Nazi, right? It is fraternity world 3.0. And so clearly grandpa had a lot of Nazi memorabilia, and they just displayed it all over the house. And these people happened to be Jewish. And so they walked in the house and they were like, no, we're not sleeping here, which is totally fine. That makes all the sense to me. But I definitely remember the host not really understanding why these people were offended, were frustrated, felt completely unsafe, why their house was a violent place. And I remember the trust and safety people who had to handle it, because that's when we were starting to practice with our consequence board. I would be like, so what's going on? What are we talking about? And they'd be like, yeah, the hosts just don't understand why they have to take the 6 foot tall glass box of grandpa's Nazi outfit down. And I was like, people are wild.
Yeah.
Like when you put that up, nobody at the barbecue at the function said we shouldn't put that up.
Yeah. I mean, they must be really kind of isolated in terms of people around them just being just as clueless as them. Or maybe they were just faking it and they knew the whole time.
From what I got out of it was that it was, as a proud dark-skinned Black woman who every day sits in a white supremacist uncomfortable state, what I learned from that experience was that like there are some people out there that really cannot dissociate their emotional connection to their ancestors to the truth. And that's,
Yeah.
I forget the details to be very honest, but like that's what I remember coming from those conversations was that we had a host family that was clearly performing, behaving in racism and anti-Semitism and anti-everythingness. And they were like, but that's not us, but we love our grandpa. And I remember it sparked a lot of conversation with people that I work with, just very interesting intellectual conversation of like, what does that mean about the world?
Yeah.
People are willing to uphold and glorify their ancestry that is so ugly in the name of, but that's my grandpa. And I think that's
Yeah.
bigger two concerns that I have about the world. But yeah.
Wow. So much. So much that we could go into. But we'll save it for the next
Another day.
interview. So, okay. So Airbnb compliance, program management type. What was your title?
I think it was compliance program manager, compliance project manager. I remember leaving Airbnb to go to Facebook, and all I thought about was I can never recreate that experience at Airbnb of being in the room where it happens, but I always want to do work where I'm in the room where it happens, whatever it is. And at the time, 2016 to 2018, the room where it happens was this type of compliancy stuff, how to keep people safe on your platform. Early 2018, it started to be the room where it happens is privacy.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so Facebook hit me up. And I remember we were talking, and Facebook was like, let's do some hate speech stuff in the EU. And I was like, that sounds fabulous.
Yeah.
But because, the ancestor Harriet Tubman is hilarious, I get to Facebook, and I distinctly remember that the week that I was negotiating my Facebook offer, this was March 2018, Zuckerberg was at Congress testifying
Oh,
over
yes.
data and privacy. So I joined Facebook. And for folks who don't know, when you join a lot of large companies, you could walk in and say, I was hired to be a chef, but if we got mopping to do, you about to mop.
Yeah.
So I walked in and I was like, I'm hired to do this. And the legal team was like, yeah, that's cute. You about to get onto this privacy. And so I spent almost 2 years at Facebook really digging deep. I did hate speech stuff because I really fought for that. I was like, I can do hate speech. Allow me to go to Europe and do hate speech, right? And so I did that stuff. But this underlying belly of Facebook for me was one, how to build relationships with law enforcement around the world, because law enforcement continues to ask social media companies for information about their users, and social media companies tend to usually say no, but we have to build out that process. Also, we have to build relationships with law enforcement. We don't want law enforcement to think that we're anti them, but we are anti messing up the rights of our users, right? So it's a very fine line. But then two, privacy. And how is privacy used and not used, and how can it be used for violence, and how can it be used for good? And so having that experience, which is what led me to Twitter. So in Twitter, so this is what March 2nd of 2022 was my first, I'm sorry, 2020 was my first day at Twitter. And I went to Twitter to lead a lot of cross-functional privacy initiatives that came from legal that had to be transformed throughout the company. So things like GDPR, things like LGPD, which are these terms which, Cliff Note version.
Yeah.
A certain company comes in and says, we don't like what you're doing with our data. We don't like how you're talking about privacy. You have to change these things on your platform, or you can't have your company in our country. So GDPR hit in April 2018 when I was at Facebook, and that came from the EU, specifically from Ireland. LGPD came in 2020. I really felt like the Brazilian government took the Irish one and just kind of like changed a couple things, added a couple sprinkles, and like did their thing. We have an India one coming out. Every country's having one. And so when I joined Twitter, that was the path that I was on, was they were like, hey, you can come in and you can be the person in legal that when these laws come, you get to build these cross-functional teams across the company to do what the law said. And a lot of that stuff, product changes, or maybe it's like establishing new policies for our users, whether it's as simple as making a banner at the bottom of Twitter or like literally changing the process flow for how a user is introduced to Twitter. We had to follow these laws, and I got to strategically lead these teams to do that. And I did that until it was dope. Yeah. Yeah.
That sounds so fun.
Yeah.
So, okay. So how did you transition to chief of staff?
Easy. So because I was doing a lot of this work, I was working with a lot of people. And that's one of the reasons why I like the jobs that I do. I don't like being this subject matter expertise on a specific thing. I always tell people that I'm a subject matter expertise of getting things done. And so I got to work with a lot of people and meet a lot of people. And therefore I got to learn about these different parts of the business, and I got to learn people. I love meeting people. I love learning people. I love supporting people on their journey. That's what I like to do. That's what I'm good at. That's actually my magic. All this other stuff is secondary, but that's what I'm really good at. And I started working with a lot of the engineering leadership last summer. And in November of last year, I found out that there was going to be a position open, basically being the chief of staff to the distinguished engineer of the company, who's the highest ranking engineer at the company. And I had worked with him previously and I liked him. And everyone throughout my career said that I'd be a good chief of staff. I never dabbled in it, but everyone was like, you'd be a great chief of staff. And I distinctly remember at Airbnb, there was this guy that I worked with, and he essentially was the chief of staff to the chief operating officer of the company. And I remember at Airbnb always telling people, I want his job. He didn't have the title, but that's what he did every day. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved how he'd be in this room at 9 a.m. talking about product, but then he'd be in this room at 10 a.m. talking about legal. And then he'd be in this room at 11 a.m. doing this other kind of stuff. And then somehow everyone at the company worked with him, but none of us worked together because he was bouncing around doing all these special projects and like being that strategic arm of this senior leader, and also being her number two, being the person that she can rely on and that she can trust. Right. Mm-hmm. And I would always be like, I want to be him when I grew up. And then so when this opportunity came about, I was like, oh, this is what he did. Mm-hmm. So I applied, and I fortunately got it and went through an interview process and got it. So I started doing that in January of this year. So yeah.
So help me understand the context in which I first heard chief of staff was politics, like chief of staff to the president. I know that from Scandal. That's all I know. And so when I started hearing chief of staff in the context of companies, it was actually very confusing to me. And it's still confusing to me because I don't fully understand like what the chief of staff, how the chief of staff is different to versus like a chief operating officer, or even versus like an executive assistant. Like it's just what's the difference?
So number one, every executive at major companies that, have the budget and stuff, all have an executive assistant. And by the way, they're fabulous. And you should all be nice to the executive assistants because they low-key really run the company.
Yes. No, I'm like, it's so true.
Making fun of EAs, and I'm like, because you don't like your EA, that's why you don't get anything done. Okay. They know everything. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who really own the calendar. They're the ones who decide if you can be in the room. So they are the logistical arm to whoever this person is. A chief of staff is the strategic arm of that person. So let's just make up an example. If you have a CMO at a company, especially a very large company, the CMO has direct reports. For the sake of this conversation, our Casper the Friendly Ghost CMO has 8 direct reports. We're going to assume that each of those direct reports have a specific type of marketing channel. They have a specific thing they're doing. Yeah. Right? You can be the senior VP of channel marketing, and you directly report to the CMO. And what that means is that your whole team, whether it's 2 people or 257, y'all do channel marketing stuff, right? And then you have another person who does something else in marketing, and that whole org does that kind of stuff. And you keep going down the line. But there's a lot of stuff that the CMO has to figure out that don't fit into those boxes. Mm-hmm. And they have a chief of staff. And think about it as the special projects person, right? So the CMO goes to that person and they're like, look, so nobody's doing this, but it needs to get done. And so that person is the one that goes to figure that out. And usually they stand up these project teams for 6 months or 6 years or whatever to get that special thing done. I use the term special not to say that like it's deprioritized. It's very much prioritized, but none of these other direct reports, that's not their specialty. A chief of staff will come in, let's say if like the CMO, we need to do a cross-wide marketing thing. All these senior director reports, that's not their job. The channel marketing person, their job at a major company is not to also take care of some cross-functional strategic marketing initiative that has all the other pillars. They're subject matter experts in that, right? But in the best case scenario, the CMO has given the responsibility to someone else to strategically figure it out. And maybe that senior VP just comes in the room and reads out their deliverables that are being done, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of times in companies, you have cross-functional initiatives where it's like legal's like, hey, we have a cross-functional initiative, which every piece of the company has to be involved in. Companies right now don't have like a special projects team. So guess what happens? All these leaders say, hey, chief of staff, can you go figure it out?
Yeah.
Right? Because remember, I got a day job, but legal said we got to show up. So, and you don't fight with legal. Let's show up. Let's figure that out. And you just handle that. So the chief of staff in many ways are the Olivia Popes. They are the fixers. They're the people who get things done in the confinements of their chief or their leader. All the stuff that needs to get done that their direct reports either A, can't get to, or B, they're like, this is not a me thing. Right? Mm-hmm. It goes to that person. So I always tell people, I'm like, any given day, I'm a strategic leader, I'm a program manager, or I'm a bodyguard. It depends on what I'm in. That's the job. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking about Cyrus Bean.
No, 100%. I mean, minus the fact that like he was
a murderer.
A murderer. I don't dabble in that, but yeah, very much so. Of like, and people have to remember that at the end of the day, things have to get done. And many times when you're talking to your leader, there's something that gets in their lap and they're like, I don't know who's going to, it doesn't fit in this cookie cutter box. And they need that operations person, that leader, that person who has really good relationships in the company and or is really great at making those relationships to go just handle it. Get this off my plate, handle it, give me updates, right? I think a good 50% of my job sometimes is going to like middle level leaders and directors and being like, so if you give me this resource, I'll give you half a kidney. Like a lot of it is very simple. Like a lot of my job many times has to do with people upset with each other. Like, hey, Lexi, this is not getting done because these two people don't like each other. And I have to strategically figure out, okay, so cool, this stuff has to get done. So do we find something really cool for this person to do over here? Do we have a hard conversation? I think my specialty being a chief of staff is I am a safe space. Everyone who works with me knows that like what you say to me stays here. I'm the safe space, and I'm a safe space because I believe in equity. I believe that you're bigger than your actual day job. I believe that if you are treated with equity and humanity at work, you will do better work. The work will get done. And then finally, I believe in the work getting done. So you can come to me and be like, Lex, I really don't want to do this. And I'm like, bet, I can't take you off of it right now, but give me a couple weeks to see who I can talk to and what I can gamble to put you over here and to put somebody else who wants to do this here, right? I get to have opportunities where I get to go in rooms and say, it would be great if we use this opportunity to allow a junior engineer to be in this room, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of the stuff that I do. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. I'm low-key jealous.
It's fun. It's fun. I enjoy it. I really like my job. Yeah.
All right. So let's get to Sista Circle.
Yeah.
So you founded Sista Circle in 2017. So I think we met in 2017. So you had just founded it, which I don't think I realized that it was that new at the time.
Yeah.
And so tell me about like what was the process? There had to be a chain of events that led you to be like, okay, I'm making this thing.
Yeah. It starts at NetApp. So I think that I've always been a community builder, but never used that term because that term was always very scary to me. At NetApp, I actually I started an organization called Bagel. I forgot what it stood for, but at the time at 23, it sounded really cute. I went to every engineering leader and I was like, I need budget for Bagel. And they were like, what are you doing? But somehow I convinced these people to give me like $10,000 to start a new college grad program at NetApp. So NetApp has a new college grad program. And by definition, it had recruiters that would hire, this cohort of new college graduates, whether it's undergrad, master's, PhD, right? So they had a system that said, you are new to this, like you just finished a degree of some sort. But I remember in NetApp, like we didn't have any get-togethers. So like we didn't know each other, and we'd always be up and down in the hallways, like look at each other like, yeah, based on the number of wrinkles that you may or may not have, we may have the same experience in the world. Right? Like they didn't formally put us together. We didn't have like a mentorship program. We didn't have like a monthly series with leadership where the leader would come and talk to us about stuff. And I was just tired. I was lonely. I didn't know what to do with my job. Remember, I came up not knowing how to do my job. But more importantly, I was adulting. And I think any kid at 22 understands this very strange feeling of adulting. It is stressful. It sucks. And I hated it. And I'm so glad I'm over it, right? Of just like, what are taxes? How do I fix my car? So rent's actually due on the 1st of the month, like not the 7th. Okay, right? Like things like that a lot of us didn't know. And so I started awkwardly just going up to people that I thought were my age, which looking back is probably a problematic move to assume certain things. And I was like, hi, I'm Lexi. I'm new. Are you new? Oh, you don't know what's going on either? Great. Let's do lunch. Because I was just looking for people. So, and over time, this became a thing. And I got to like literally senior leadership was like, this sounds cool. We'll give you money for it. So it's, but by the time that I left NetApp, we had like this amazing rotation. They actually hired a program manager in HR to run Bagel and like just build it out. We had a monthly leadership series. The leader would come and talk to us. And that's also how I got to meet leaders because I would have to go find the leaders to talk. And I'd be like, hi, I'm Lexi. I don't know what's going on, but like, you'd be great to tell us your story. You want to come on Friday? Come on Friday. I'll talk to your admin. Bye. Right. And of course, again, they were like, who is this black girl just walking around and like going up to the CEO and being like, can you come talk to me about some stuff? Because I don't know what's going on. And I think that part of it, they were honored. And then part of it, they were just so perplexed that they were like, okay, like worst case scenario, I show up and this is a complete waste of time. But every major leader wants to hang out with a 22-year-old that thinks they're Beyonce. Loves it, right?
Yeah.
I started giving budget for food. Like they'd be like, well, Lexi, here, I'll give you $500 when I show up. And then like, y'all can actually have food. So I was just like catering stuff in. We had a whole vendor list. Okay. We had a diversity supplier program for Bagel. At the time, I didn't call it that. I was just like, if you gonna give me money, I'm gonna give it to black people. So yeah, come on, Caribbean restaurant. Let's get these oxtails on Friday, right? But I was doing the work. And so fast forward to Airbnb, I went to Airbnb and Airbnb had programs like that. But what was lacking for me was I was the only black person in legal. And we had a black ERG, an employee resource. And I would go once a month to our meetings and I loved it. And shout out to all of the black people at Airbnb, not only when I was there, but still continuing doing the work. And we were this small and mighty group. Airbnb was only 2,000 people. So that's why we were so small. But I didn't have people that could actually help me with my actual work problems. I had community at work that I could go and talk to about like systemic problems. Like, oh, this person said this. How do I navigate that? Because that wasn't cool. Or like, oh, I'm having this hard conversation with my manager. How would you do it? Right? I had community to have lunch with, to have breakfast with, to hang out on the weekends with. But I didn't have anyone that I could talk to about how do I show up and show out in these meetings with these leaders? How do I tell a C-suite member of this company that they are late on their deliverable from last week? And nobody could tell me that. So I decided to start a group like very similar to NetApp. And I was like, someone needs to tell me how to do my job.
So in many ways, it was in part to meet your own, not just to provide community for others, but to also help meet this need
No,
that
in all the
you
ways.
had.
No, in all the ways. It was 100% selfish starting. It had nothing to do with any of y'all. It was literally me being like, I don't know how to do my job. Who would like to teach me? And if Iris wants to come to and get a chicken and a waffle, that's great. Like, no shade to Iris. I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to stop your freedom fight. But this is not about you, sis. I know what's going on. And if you get some learnings too, blessings. That's what Sister
Yeah.
Circle was.
Yeah.
And then what happened was that over time, I was like, oh, cool. Other people enjoy this. Okay, I'll keep calling up restaurants and asking for a reservation for 30. And then what happened one day, I'll never forget, I was at Airbnb because we had free food. And I was like,
Yeah.
how many of these other women, like these other 100 women in this Facebook group right now, also have free food? And I'll never forget, because a lot of these tech companies, unfortunately, a lot of the Black resource is in the food program and the security program, which is horrible, and a separate conversation about non-equity. But the plus side was that, guess what? I knew all of them. We were all kinfolk. So I remember at Airbnb, I went to Dave. He was the head of security. He sat in the front. I said, Dave, how many people could I theoretically bring to breakfast every day? It's problematic. And he was like, are you asking how many Black people could you? I was like, yes. 10. And I was like, bet. And so I went in the group and I was like, who wants to come for breakfast at Airbnb? Because I was like, instead of spending my money to eat with you, many of us work at these companies that give us free food. And so I started just hosting free breakfasts at Airbnb.
Yeah.
People each, that was the policy.
I remember.
I'd be like, come eat. And then other women would be like, well, you want to come to Uber? And I'd be like, yeah. And then other women would be like, well, I have some slots at Facebook. It'd be like, yeah. And so we started just doing these mini breakfast sessions at all these companies with free food. Because it was like, if I'm going to eat, might as well have my bagel while talking to Iris and getting to know her and seeing how we connect. And that's what formed Sista Circle. And then now we have what it has over the years. Now we have partnerships and logos and websites and like missions and curriculums. But it did start with this idea of, can someone tell me how to do this as a Black woman? Because none of these people are telling me how to do it. And I think that I'm going to fail. I'm either A, going to be the angry Black woman, or B, I'm not going to be aggressive enough in these meetings, and then I won't get my job done, and then therefore I fail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what you've built is so beautiful, so amazing. I mean, how many women are in the Facebook group now?
There are 12,000 plus in the Facebook group, and there's like 6,000 plus in LinkedIn. So right now our numbers, our unique numbers, are about 14,000 people. Yeah.
Okay. And then you also launched an email list.
Launched an email list. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I think that, so social media algorithms, as a person who's worked in social media, the algorithms are tough. I still don't understand all these algorithms, but the point is that if I post something, not everybody in that group's going to see it.
A very tiny percentage. Yeah.
Right. And so earlier this summer, with all this recession talk and, going on LinkedIn and every other day, seeing the stories of, I got laid off, my hiring freeze, the news is not helping with so-and-so's possibly having a hiring freeze. I started thinking about this idea. Part of Sista Circle, and I always call it the Underground Railroad for Black women, is for us to have knowledge. It's not for me to make your decision for your life. It's for you to have knowledge, and then you make a decision, and then you tell me how I support you in getting to that goal.
Yeah.
And with all of this stuff out in the world earlier this summer of people getting laid off, all this negativity that is true, but still negativity, I did not want our community to think that there weren't people who were hiring. So I know my LinkedIn and I know my connections, but Iris, I don't know your connections. And so the newsletter really came about this idea of like, what if every woman in the group, when you go on LinkedIn and you see someone who says, look, I'm hiring, how do you tell our community about that thing?
Yeah.
And how do we make sure, despite algorithm, you see that information? And that's where the newsletter came about. Is like, okay, start an intake form, allow anyone and everyone to drop things in the intake form, and then just send it to people's inboxes every Sunday. And again, you don't have to do anything with it, but it's just about sharing knowledge to you, because knowledge is power. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I think the switch to newsletter is super smart. We also were heavily building our community on online and on Discord, and Discord is a mess. We're transitioning from Discord, but one of the things that we found, like especially when I was fundraising, is investors kept saying like, where's your community, where's your community, who's your community? And even though I could say, well, we have 50,000 followers on social media and we have 3,000 in our Discord, da da da, it was like the engagement rates were so low compared to the number of people. And I was like, man, we have to find a way to increase engagement. And email was like, is it, and for anybody who's listening, this is like what I'm realizing
Email's
is
great.
the marketing, like the marketing trick is email is everything. It's like the most effective marketing tool, email and text message. Skip the social media and get straight
Email.
to your
Email's
your
everything.
customer.
Oh my God, yeah. And it's funny, it's wild to me in this new email journey. Because again, we only post one newsletter a week. I'm not trying to invade people's email boxes. I do not want this to be like, oh, got another email from Sista Circle today, right? Um, and it's been insane just looking at our numbers, right? So, like, again, if you're listening, make sure you get an email campaign software so you can see the actual data. But even, we have our monthly speaker series with Sista Circle, and even seeing how the numbers have skyrocketed with the number of people who register because of the email. Because people are like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I want to go to that. Click. And things like that. It's wild. So I definitely highly recommend it. We're definitely going to keep this train going. What I do love about social media, though, especially for us, is that that's where, in my opinion, the magic happens. I think a lot of people look at data, and I think email brings data. It says like X percentage of people read your email and clicked your link. And I think that's important for capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
For us as Black people, there's this other component to that, which is where can I go to ask how to have a hard conversation with my manager about my pay?
Yeah.
That's the beauty of the safe space, because those conversations can't happen in email, right? And so whenever I'm talking to possible partners or sponsors to Struggle Black Women in Tech, I'm always telling them like, yeah, here are the email numbers, great. That gets you in the room. But the magic in this organization is really giving Black women a space to thrive and to talk in ways that we just cannot talk at work. I don't care about your authentic poster, billboard, mission statement. It's not going to happen. And so we are that in many ways, kind of our own professional development little enclave of like, okay, so this is how you say this. This is what you ask for. Hey, can you just send me an a quick invite and we can talk about this live tomorrow at 3:00 during my lunch. And that's the magic that email takes away, that I think for bodies like us, the diaspora, marginalized people, or as I like to call the majority of the world, because Black and brown people are the majority in data wise. That's where we really, really thrive. I think email gives you the numbers, data gives you fundraising, gets people in the room. And so I'll gladly do that, but that's not the magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I completely understand. I feel the same about our events.
Yeah.
Our events are just like super, super powerful. It's really where the magic happens. And that's what keeps people coming back for
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah.
So if folks want to find Sister Circle, how do they find it?
Yes.
And across all the platforms.
So Twitter and Instagram is at Sista Circle BWiT.
Sister without an H.
It's still without an H. We
Okay.
spell it like my ancestors spelled it, without an H. On Facebook, if you actually just go on Facebook groups and type in Sister Circle Black Women in Tech, it'll show up. The same thing for LinkedIn. I think the best way is our website that was beautifully produced and done by Isa Cespedes, who is our creative director. And that's www.sistacirclebwit.com. We are currently actively trying to finalize our partners and sponsors for 2023, especially since these partners, we are going to be going back outside. This is the first time since COVID we're going back outside. And so we're planning a lot of like curated experiences with a lot of companies. So that's what we're working on right now. So send us a note and we can discuss.
Yeah, I am. The website really is beautiful. I'm
Gorgeous. Yeah.
so proud of you. I'm so
Yeah.
proud of how much this has grown. And I am so happy that I went to Facebook groups and
Me
put,
too. Me too.
I
I remember we
literally was
met.
like Black women in tech, and like Sister Circle popped up because I needed, just like you said, I needed a group that I could like trust
Yeah.
and be a part of.
Didn't
And
we meet at an Airbnb breakfast, a free breakfast that I hosted?
it wasn't, I don't think you had hosted it. I think we had, it was just a one-on-one.
Okay.
You
But
basically
you
gave
planned
me a
the Airbnb.
tour.
Yes. Yes.
You gave me a tour, and we had like lunch or something like that at the office.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I met some security folks too. I remember that.
Shout out to Dave in San Francisco. That's my buddy. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's the one thing I do miss about working in the office. I really enjoy working from home, but I do miss that access of like, just come over and have an omelet for free.
hmm
Yeah,
hmm
I do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm
Thank
so
you.
excited to share your story. And I know that you're not an NFT expert,
Not yet,
right?
but because of
Not
you, I'm
yet,
learning. I'm
but
learning.
yes, you are learning.
Yes.
So for our listeners who are many of them NFT, Web3, crypto, etc.,
Mhm.
metaverse fans, where are you at in terms of
Yeah.
like Web 3.0, and like what are you kind of thinking? Like what are your thoughts right now?
My thoughts, I am very early stages. I started my learnings from Iris Nevins, if you've heard of her. But as a leader in the technology industry, as a community builder, and more importantly, as a self proclaimed freedom fighter, this is what I think about Web3. Black people need to have as much information around what this is as quickly as possible. Again, knowledge is power. I'm also aware of a lot of people who find this very controversial. This is not their cup of tea. And that's fine too, because I'm like, it's fine to make something not your cup of tea if you've researched it and learned it. And what I want for our community, for Black bodies around the world, in order to help our Underground Railroad and our liberation, is we need to be getting this information before all the white people have it and then we get the crumbs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I really support, and I'm so honored to know you and what you're doing with your organization and with your community in the NFT space, and all the other people who are involved. Um, that hip hop artist you told me about, I forgot her name, who like literally is out here like making.
Natasha?
Yes,
Yes.
I'm so glad that Black people are really getting into this and diving deep. And my message to any Black person is, you need to understand exactly what is going on and then make a decision that is best for you. But I want you to have the knowledge yesterday, because this is going to happen. Regardless if you like it or not, it's going to happen. And I need Black bodies to know exactly what's happening and how to tap into it and how to use it for their personal liberation. That's what I need. So, yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I also think something that a lot of people have forgotten or are overlooking is the fact that Web3 is tech. And
Yes.
so for all the folks that work in tech, it's like AI. You know, I feel like for a long time it was like machine learning, like
Yeah.
training computers to think, da 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 da. Like it was just kind of this thing that felt kind of far off into the distance. And now it's starting to be incorporated into a lot of technology. And that is like a part of our day to day lives. And so, Web3 is kind of the same. And I think even folks in tech sometimes forget that this is just like another
Oh
level
yeah.
of
I
tech.
think that and because a lot of my work is, used to be in regulatory spaces. I remember when we were talking about this a few weeks ago when you did your workshop with Sister Circle, right? About how the people that are getting into Web3 from a legal perspective, from a compliance perspective, in 5 to 10 years, they will never have to work again.
Yeah.
They were literally building the Bible for this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my first introduction to blockchain was that movie Dope.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody hasn't seen it, you should. And it's about this black teenager in LA. I remember Zoe Kravitz was in it. And how he was making money off of cryptocurrency, and then using that cryptocurrency to sell drugs. He was not a drug addict. He had a single mother. He was poor and he was insanely brilliant. And he got into Harvard. And they were like, how are you making this money? And it was through crypto.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first understanding of crypto. And that's how I started really like researching crypto and like, what is this and that kind of thing. And very similarly, it's just, we have to be in the space to know what this is before it gets taken over and before it becomes this, normalized commodity, because then we've missed out on building our community within it.
Well, Lexi, there's a lot of jobs in Web 3.0, especially around compliance.
I know.
So,
I know.
Coinbase.
I know. I've been
Binance.
a lot with those roles. I've been up a lot for those roles. Yes. We'll see where it takes me, but best believe the regulatory space for this stuff, kind of like the regulatory space for marijuana, I'm like, Black people need to be involved in those conversations. You are building the policy for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited for you to, continue on in your Web 3.0 journey, and
yes.
We will always be here as a resource. I'm so happy that we're partnering. Tech Misfits and Sista Circle have a partnership, and we've been supporting each other. And please let me know if there's any other ways that we can support what Sista Circle is doing.
Of course. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too.